Computer. All right, welcome. I'm Peggy Moore, and this is August the 25th, 2020. And welcome to the webinar called Welcoming the Egyptian Goddesses into Our Lives Today, into this world, so that they can serve as guides and assist us on our spiritual journey. And those of you who are just coming in, please do post in the chat your name, tell us where you are in the world, and let me know what's going on. You can also post questions in the Q&A. In just a few minutes, I'm going to do a slideshow, and when I get into the slideshow, I can't get to chat or the Q&A at the time. My system just doesn't allow me to do both. But when I get through with the slideshow, I will go back to the Q&A and see if I can answer some questions. So feel free to post in that Q&A, and do feel free to post in the chat as well. Even though I won't be able to read it much as we go through this, others with us today on the webinar will be able to read that and see that. I see Mary Alice coming in, and Doris from Toronto. Hi, Doris. Nancy from Richmond. Yes, lots of names. I see Susan from Asheville. Yes, lots of people I know. Lots of people I remember names from the summit, and I never actually met you, but I'm so happy that you are here. And I see Sandra, you've raised your hand. I'm not going over to open the mics on that, but if you will post in the Q&A, I'll see if I can get on here. Yeah, and someone asked about the recording, saying that she cannot stay on. I don't know for sure that we'll be on here for 2 hours, certainly an hour, a maximum of 2 hours. And yes, I will have a recording posted. It'll probably be up by in the morning, and I'll send out an email with the link for that. So, and I do want to say that as I go through this, I will be teaching a course on the Egyptian goddesses during the month of September 2nd, I believe it is, through the 30th. And well, actually, let me post a link right now where that registration is, and if you you can snag that out of chat. But I will also, when I send out the link for the recording, I'll send out the link for the registration on that course with information. And you can go to either of my websites. Go to the link that says the webinar, and then you scroll down, and it has information about the course if you're interested in looking further into it. So I want to start this morning. I'm sure that we'll have some more folks coming in as we progress, but I'm going to go ahead and get started calling the directions, which is something that that certainly you want to do some sort of a calling or a prayer or a beginning, acknowledging the divine as you start any ceremony. And I do this as I start events. So join me for the calling of the spirit wheel, and you can stay right where you are, or if you know the directions in your home, you can turn the directions as we do them. And I will start in the east, and I hope that my voice does not get muffled from the turning. And I say, good morning, Divine One. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for bringing us together this day. And I call the ancestors of the East to bring the illumination into our lives, to bring illumination into this webinar as we acknowledge and recognize the divine oneness and all of the aspects of the oneness in the manifestation of the goddesses and the gods of Egypt. We thank Ra, the god of the sun, and of the goddesses, the names are many who represent the sun. Newt in particular, that I'll mention. Thank you, Newt, for coming. And I thank you for the element of the East, the sun, that brings us the air. And the air, thank you for the air that is our container of our memories. Thank you for blowing this energy into us today. Thank you, Divine One. And to the south, the south, the direction of love and laughter and dance and music. And we call to Hathor and Basset as we move to the south. And the fires of the south. The fires ask us to step into the flame, to burn away all that we're ready to release, to let go of those things we no longer need, and help us to stretch and grow and be as we let those things go. We thank you, Divine One. And to the west, the west, the direction of introspection. Hathor and Hapi stand at the gate. Sekhmet and Hapi. Sekhmet, the divine warrior, helping us, leading us into the darkness so that we may sit in introspection and learn and remember who we are. And Hapi of the water flowing across us, the water of so many forms, the water of liquid, of gas, of ice, changing, always the same and yet never the same, the changing forms of the water, washing over us, washing away the ashes from the fires of the south, helping us stand refreshed as we look deeply within our souls. And we take that deep introspection from the west and move to the north, where Ma'at stands. Ma'at reminding us of truth and justice, of wisdom, the north, the earth that is solid yet permeable, the earth that holds the roots, that holds life and growth, the earth that holds the stellar memory of the stars and the planets, the earth helping us remember who we are. And we come full circle back to the center, acknowledging the divine and acknowledging Isis. Isis, who stands in the center to teach us sovereignty, to teach us who we are and help us remember to stand up, to follow the path that we agreed when we came to earth. And I say, Aho, Ashi, Amen, Hamdulillah, blessed be, and so it is. So welcome. I see we've had several more people join us since I started the directions. Thank you for being here today, and please continue to post in the chat your name, where you're from, and if you have any questions, post those in the Q&A, and I will try to answer them as I can. So I want to present to you this information. Now, first of all, you need to know that I'm in my goddess costume here. This is called a galabia. Some people pronounce it jalabia, and it's a traditional Egyptian clothing. Let me stand, see if I can stand so you can see a little of it. But it's a very traditional Egyptian dress that people wear. And I thought it was very appropriate to start the webinar today with Egyptian clothing. So I want to welcome you so very, very much. And let me switch over. I don't think I have any new questions that have popped up. I will, as I go through the slideshow, I will not be able to look at the Q&A or the chat. Somehow it's screen sharing and doing that's very difficult. So I will come back to the Q&A when we get to the end and hopefully have some time to, to answer some of your questions. So when you think of a question, type it in the Q&A, and please do share in the chat where you are located, and anything that you'd like to say during the presentation, you can put that in the chat. I may not be able to see it while we're online today, but I certainly will read everything in the chat afterwards. And I will post the recording, and I'll send you the link to get to that. So let me see if there's anything in particular I wanted to tell you before we begin. As we go through this, I'll talk about different names that are used. Egypt was Kemet for thousands of years, and it essentially translates into black land because of the soil. And so even the names of the gods and the goddesses are variable depending on which translation is being used. But I'll talk a little about that as we get into it. So let me screen share and pull up the PowerPoint. And I hope that you can all see that and probably see my picture as well. And hopefully that won't block out too much of the screen as we go through it. So the name of this webinar, as well as the class that I will teach in September, is Welcoming the Egyptian Goddesses, seeing the goddesses as aspects of the divine, seeing the goddesses as the divine feminine, and looking at the archetypes of these goddesses so that we can pull that into our lives today. And so as we begin to look at the goddesses and who they were and how they can work with us today, we are beginning to look within, remembering who we are, remembering who we are, connecting or reconnecting ourselves to the divine, looking inside, looking through that inner voice that speaks to us, that gives us information. We'll look at the myths and see them as ways to help us, turn the lock, open the door to that inner knowing that's already there within us. And we'll use the archetypes to weave these aspects into ourselves so that we can use the information in our own practices, in our own rituals, and weave them into our own belief systems as we connect with the divine. So why the Egyptian goddesses? Well, I think we could take any goddesses throughout the mythology of time, but the reason that the Egyptian goddesses are so significant was the ancient Egyptian belief in the principle of being, in the oneness itself, in that all of that is animated, no separation between the spiritual and the mundane. That the sacred and the mundane is a very interesting place to be. Maggie Moon, who's on this call today, Maggie and I were doing a presentation on Egypt, And after we came back from our first trip to Egypt, and we had one of our pictures was a photograph of a mosque, and right next to it is this huge sign for McDonald's. And we put that in the presentation with the title, The Sacred and the Mundane, because that is Egypt. That is Egypt, seeing everything as both sacred, regardless of how mundane it may appear to be. So everything had a purpose, and everything was a part of working within the universe to help us remember who we are as we are connected to the divine. So the gods and the goddesses were guides to the ancient Egyptians to help us understand that and help us remember how to harmonize with the divine. And so the spirit wheel that I just called with the directions help us to align and connect with the divine. The spirit wheel itself, now this is a picture of I have two spirit wheels actually on my property. This is the smaller one, and this is a living, interactive energy. And stepping into the spirit wheel, or stepping into a labyrinth, or stepping into a Vesica Pisces, are places where we can reach a little deeper, can help us connect. If we will open ourselves to it, we can connect more, connect deeper, connect more easily with the divine. And we can use it as a sacred way of seeing, a sacred way of traveling on our journeys. So part of what I will do when I teach the course is go much deeper into each of the gods and goddesses that we'll talk about today, though I will briefly introduce each one of them. And on the spirit wheel, there are different ways of looking at the different gods and goddesses. But for me, in the East, is of course Ra, who's known as the sun god, but Newt, who brings the sun to us, and I didn't write her name in here, but her mother, Tefnut, we'll talk about today, is also from the East. And they teach us this sharing, the generosity. And in the South, Hathor and Basset, teaching us creativity and teaching us love and laughter and dance. And in the West, Sekhmet, who takes us into that deep knowledge, and then Hapi, who is the god, goddess of the water. And in the North, we call on Ma'at, M-A apostrophe A-T, and some pronounce it Ma'at, some pronounce it Ma'at. But it's Ma'at is truth. It's understanding the truth of the divine and teaching us the courage to stand up, to be who we are intended to be. And all of those lead us to the center with the Eye of Horus, with the triple spiral of Ireland, and Isis, who is the center of the wheel, because she is our representative of sovereignty. Sovereignty meaning a position of royalty, but meaning the divine principle to help us know who we are, to help us realize that we too are divine beings. That aspect of us, that aspect of our soul, is directly connected to the oneness. And so we have the ability to become one, to remember who we are and be connected consciously to the divine. The spiritual ancestors call us to remember our place in the cosmic web, to remember that sacred relationship, to remember, to listen to the sacred sounds that transform us, to feel, to experience, to know. So as we look at the myths, let's spend just a couple of minutes on history and when did these myths begin? Now, Egypt is deeply connected to Sirius and Orion. You know, the question is, I don't know if my picture is covering up on your screen, it's covering up on mine, but a little bit, but the question is, did we come from the stars? Egyptians would say yes, perhaps from Atlantis, because there are many ancient stories that lead when Atlantis sunk, that the inhabitants who survived, as well as those who came back in future lives, came to Egypt, and legends of them coming to Ireland and other places, some South American countries and various places. So, and those are stories, those are myths, those are a part of the unwritten history of a lot of cultures. But what about archaeology and history? So if we go back before the Sphinx, before the pyramids, indigenous people honored the land and its inhabitants. A few years ago, less than 10 years ago, this site in southern Africa was discovered, and the name today is Adam's Calendar. There are many of these standing stones. This is the largest, and Stonehenge, which was only built about 5,000 years ago, appears to be modeled off Adam's Calendar, which is estimated to be at least 75,000 years old. And there's a link here to that information telling you about that. But and you can even look at the two pictures and see that there is certainly some similarity there, but people who've looked at it much more deeply really have identified the connection of multiple things within Stonehenge connected to the similarities at Adam's Calendar. And so it seems that across time, we have always yearned for that connection to the divine. Currently, right now, there is excavation happening in Zacatecas, Mexico, and they have determined that this site is 30,000 years old. And of course, the carvings on the caves in France are more than 30,000 years. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was not too long ago discovered, and it's about 11 or 12,000 years old. The Sphinx, it's questionable about how old it is, but there are many sources that will say 9,000 years ago. Egypt, there are many sources from the written material from Egypt indicating that the ancient Egyptian civilization is much, much older than that. And in Ireland, the mounds and the standing stones, some of them are at least 6,000 years old. I've seen some sources that even indicate 9,000. So we're going very far back in history. And what I do want to know, and some of you may have been on other classes with me and have heard me talk about this before, but the goddess, the divine feminine, was the central way that the world existed. We're in an age of patriarchy now, but it was a time of matriarchy. That's about 7,000 years ago and prior to that. And in that time period, what we know from archaeology is that it was a time of peace because there were no defensive perimeters in the villages and in the settlements, and that there were sacred places always in the center of the village and in the middle of the homes. So we know that during that period of matriarchy was essentially a peaceful time, and it was a time of the sacred feminine, or the divine feminine, the divine mother. Oral traditions from indigenous cultures all over the world tell stories about the Earth Mother goddess. And they talk about the fullness of life and the generosity and the fruitfulness of life during these periods of divine feminine. The great goddess of Willendorf was determined to be 25,000, or actually that's BCE, so it's 27,000 years old. And this is just a wax model of it. But the divine feminine teaches us the deep creativity and receptivity, the regeneration of birth, death, and rebirth, and the wisdom consciousness. So I'm not leaving out the divine masculine, because that is as much a part as the divine feminine. But at this point in time, because the focus in our world is on patriarchy, because that's the era that we're in right now, I'm taking our focus into the divine feminine. The ancient Egyptians, the writings, the ancient writings that I'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes, but they indicate that ancient Egypt, before the pharaohs, began 36,000 years ago. And that's because there is, they refer to the cycle, the zodiacal cycle of 26,000 years. And there's a statement about having circled the sun once plus the additional period, which mathematically brings us to about 36,000 years. Regardless of how long they've been about, they call us to remember our interconnectedness with all living beings. This picture, I took this picture in Egypt at Komombo Temple. And to me, it's such a representation the sacredness of those temples, with the light coming through in this way. It's such a beautiful way to remember the connectedness, to remember to honor all of the elements, the fire, the earth, the air, the water. So as we move into the talk about the goddesses, the legends, the stories are that the people who came to Egypt, however many years ago, 36,000, 50,000, 5,000, whatever the time may have been, they followed the river. They followed the river from the south, because the Nile River runs to the north. And so they came from the southern areas of Eastern Africa, moving to the north, which the Nile goes all the way to the Mediterranean Sea in the north. And so the legends are that the people followed these waters and brought their mysteries with them. They came to Sekhmet and established a new civilization there. And their gods and their goddesses emerged from the waters. So who were these Egyptian goddesses? Now, not every picture that you'll see in here is one that I took, but most of these pictures I took on one of my trips to Egypt. And this was taken from a boat on the Nile. And if you'll notice, there is a little animal that's actually a camel. And these are some more camels in the background. But the Egyptian gods and goddesses. So the stories tell us, they speak of them as if they were living beings. Some say that they were divine energies and were and are the highest expression of the attributes and the functions of a monotheistic mysticism. Many people think that ancient Egypt believed in, was a polytheistic religion, but most of the writings that have been translated indicate that the ancient Egyptians believed in the one God, and all of the gods and goddesses were expressions or attributes of the divine, of the oneness. So they believed in a supreme being. And the term, what we call gods and goddesses, the term in Egypt was neter or neteru, neteru being the feminine, neter being the masculine derivative of the word. But it comes from the oldest written text in the world. And it's the Egyptian book of Coming Forth by Light. Now, Egyptologists many years ago named this the Book of the Dead because it is a guideline on what to do in the other world after one dies, but there's much more to this. And so the actual translation is the Book of Coming Forth by Light, because that was the belief that when we died, we went back to the light. So there's a quote in the Book of Coming Forth by Light that says, "I am the eternal. I am that which created the Word. I am the Word. I am many, many of names and many of forms, and my being exists in every neter." So many authors, particularly Egyptian authors, really talk about the ancient Egyptian religion being surrounded with the oneness, the one divine. So the neter, or neteru, rose from the waters of the Nun. Now the Nun was what was there before the worlds were created. It's the primordial soup before the beginning. Many people say that the Nun coming into existence was what scientists call the Big Bang. So look into the center, look into the swirl, and I'd like to take you on a journey with the Nun before time began. So just sit comfortably and begin to take a few slow breaths. If you are a regular meditator, you may choose to just close your eyes and go into your meditative place, or you may choose to just look at the screen, look at the swirl, look into the middle, and I'd like to take you on a journey before time began. So take a deep, slow, easy breath in and out, breathing at your own pace, but breathing slower than you normally would breathe. Breathing in, breathing out. And go with me on this journey, staring into the picture, into the Nun, or staring into the backs of your eyelids, and travel with me back through the last 100 years, the last 1,000 years, the last 10,000 years, 100,000 years. Continue going back before time in the primordial soup, the watery abyss, the waters of time. And in this place, the divine spoke the world into existence through tones, through the sound of the beginning. So let yourself float in this primordial water. And remember that your soul is a part of all that is. And you existed before time existed. You existed before Mother Earth existed. So take another deep breath in, slow and easy breath in, and hold it just a few seconds. And then release it just as slowly as you took it in, slowly out. And when you've expelled all your breath, hold it again for just a few more seconds. And then take another slow breath in. And in your physical body, you're activating that pineal gland with this deep breathing and pausing. So become aware of your breathing again. And once again, become aware of time and move forward to 100,000 years ago, and forward to 10,000 years ago, and forward 1,000 years, and forward to 100 years ago, and come back into 2020. Come back into the room where you're sitting. Come back with your breath. Come back into the room. And once again, look at the picture on the screen and know and remember that you too are part of the divine. So as we talk about creation, I want to introduce you to 3 of the creation stories. There are far more than that, but 3 of the Egyptian stories of the Neter, who were the mothers of creation. And we're going to look at Newt, at Moot, and Isis, as each as mothers of creation. Newt, or Nit, it's pronounced a couple of different ways. She's regarded as the goddess of creation, the mother goddess who invented birth. She was present when the waters began to swirl, and at her command, the waters gave rise to the Bin Bin, which is the primordial mound. So let me tell you the story of Newt. The priests of Heliopolis, and this is the beginning of ancient Egypt history that is written down. The priests of Heliopolis taught her story as a part of the allegorical mysteries that they taught in the temples. So Nit was the first deity that emerged from the waters of the Nile. And as she rose from the waters, she rested on that primeval mound, the Bin Bin, and that had formed from the mist of the waters. And raising her voice, she uttered the first sounds or words of power. Heka, Heka, and created the light. She's regarded as the virgin mother of the sun who gave birth to Ra. Ra, who's known in Egyptian as the sun god. So she granted the power of disseminating light to Ra through the sun, the vehicle of the sun. And so she had created the world and created the sun and gave Ra the power to use the sun for the continuation of the creation. Because, like all good mothers, Net was busy. She had other things to do, so she left the rest of creation to Ra. She turned herself into a bee, as in honeybee, turned herself into a bee because she had to fly off to Saw, which is in the middle of the Delta Nile, so that she could establish her cult, her temple. Now, cult is a little bit different term from what we think of it today. The followings of each of the goddesses and the gods were called cults in ancient Egypt history. So she went to establish her cult and her temple in Sao, or Sias, as it's called today. And even today, her temple is still called the House of the Bee, or in Egyptian language, Hutbit. So that's the story of Newt. Let's see, there we go. That's the rest of the story there, that after creating, she went off to form her own things and left the details to Ra. Now, Ra is sometimes written R-A, sometimes written R-E, but it's Ra, R-A. It's also Amun-Ra or Amun-Ra, depending on whose translation, who's saying it, what period of time. So all of these beautiful stories changed over time, but Net was probably the first story of that creation. And so I want to show you her symbology there with the hieroglyphs, the symbol for water, the symbol for bread, which is the food or the giver of life. This is the symbol for her bows and arrows, because she's also known as the hunter. And this is the symbol of the hieroglyph symbol for the sitting goddess. And that's with most of the hieroglyphs for the goddesses. And so this story is about 8,000 years old, and it comes out of Heliopolis during that time period. Knit is the way that we might pronounce it, because she was also known as the goddess of the shuttle, meaning the weaving, teaching us, her energy teaches us to weave and create the patterns, the harmonic patterns of the divine, and look at our patterns of behavior. Now, as we go through time, many of her attributes were passed on and identified with Isis and identified with Hathor. And there's a lot of interchange between Isis and Hathor in the stories as well. So let's move to the next one, Moot. Now, Moot is stories that she was self-created. And there was a quote that Moot, who giveth birth, but was herself not born of any. And so she's sometimes referred to as that counterpoint of the Nun, because she became the mother of creation. And she's known as the wife of Amun or Amun-Re, and a goddess of the sky. Now, this is one of many of the symbols of Moot. And if you'll notice, this is a vulture. The vulture is known as a very nurturing mother, a fierce protector, and the virgin birth is associated with the vulture because the female, with her eggs ready to be fertilized, flies through the air to catch the semen from the male so that her eggs can be fertilized. So there's no physical contact. So that's the mythology of the virgin birth, of her giving birth to the world. She's often, this picture is a little hard to see. She's often pictured with a vulture on her head, And sometimes with wings, sometimes with a cobra on her head, many different kinds of things. And here's the hieroglyphs with the vulture and then the bread and an egg, fertility, and there's the sitting goddess again. This is a picture of her with the lion face. Both of these have a lion face. And then there's Isis, who actually in Egyptian is called Osis. Very close to Isis, but it's Oset, mother of creation. She is known as the divine feminine principle, the creative power. She's called Oset of the 10,000 names, the lady of the beginning of time, the greatest of the Neteru, the queen of all. The titles go on because of the 10,000 names. And her hieroglyph again has that sitting goddess and the egg and the bread. And this is the step throne, indicating the goddess of both southern and northern, the two lands of Egypt. And Isis, like Neith, came out of that Heliopolis time period. But we see so much fusion across time with it. Isis came out of that beginning, but later when the center of the pharaohs and the religions were moved to Thebes, which is today modern day Luxor, about 2400 BCE, like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. The stories listed her as the daughter of Geb and Newt, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes as well. So she's seen through time in different aspects, but most writers agree that Isis really shows up across all of the time periods. She's known as the goddess of the moon, the goddess of love, magic, fertility, healing. The list goes on and on and on. So all these are wonderful stories, but how can they help us today? Well, what I want to do is look at them through the elements, through the directions of the spirit wheel, the facets of the divine and the archetypes, and then we weave them into our lives. So the spirit wheel, I'll go through this very quickly. The East has the element of air, and the attributes are illumination. So it's a medium of both the dark and the light. The South is the fire and the creativity. The West is the water, introspection. The North is earth and harnessing our potential. And then the center is the heart, the center of love, the center of sovereignty. And so today I'm going to talk about these particular goddesses in relationship to those. And then when I teach the course, I'll go into great detail with each of them and how they're related to the directions and the elements and the attributes and how we can weave those into our own life. We'll also look at them through the feminine archetypes. Now, I've specifically chosen to use the feminine archetypes, but these are not limited to women only. The archetypes are needed in both the masculine and the feminine of each of us, because all of us within ourselves have both masculine and feminine. And women tend to exhibit more feminine aspects, but women also have masculine aspects, and men the same, are dominant with their masculine aspects, but they have the feminine aspects as well. So we're going to look at the feminine archetypes with the goddess or the creator, creatrix, producing new creations. And then there's the archetype of the queen or the leader. There's the archetype of the lover, the passion about the physical body, but the passion about life and the sensitivity. And then there's the mother archetype with this loving care. And there's the priestess with that intuitive awareness, and the warrior who stands and fights for truth. So the archetype that of the three that we've just talked about, Neith, Moot, and Isis, are the archetype of the goddess or the creatrix. Now, that archetype produces and creates and has most of the qualities from other archetypes as well. It's kind of the blending. So the goddess energy connects with the flow of life and creates new possibilities and new ideas, and leans heavily into intuitive wisdom and sends out unconditional love and healing and rejuvenation. So sometimes this is a natural aspect of those of us who embody the goddess archetype. And when we reach a certain level of consciousness, not just a level of maturity, but a level of consciousness, that individual, man or woman, can recognize that creator, that creatrix, that goddess and God within, which begins to work through and allows even more manifestation of the creations. So there are many, I forget the number, but we're into the thousands of gods and goddesses in the Egyptian Neteru. So we're only going to look at just a few. But I want to give you just a really quick overview. The names change over time. First of all, every pharaoh had 5 names. One name was never to be revealed because that was the name of power. But there, in addition to that, were 4 other names that were used. And so when you go through history, it's very difficult to know who's who because of the differences in the names. And then in the later days of the ancient Egyptian history, you know, the Romans and the Greeks were in power, in control, and so they changed many of the names. So you've got the ancient Egyptian language translated into a spoken word that often was then translated into Greek, into Latin, into English. And then the Greeks took so much, I mean, it's historical information that the Greeks studied in Egypt. And the Greek mythology really was, it's its mythology on its own, but many of the Egyptian gods and goddesses are the same in the Greeks, but by different names. So Isis in English is Osset in Egyptian, and in Greek mythology, she's Demeter. Osiris was Asar, very close to the Isis and Osiris, Osset, Asar, and they're Nit, Athena. And then there's Hathor, or Hathor. Her Egyptian name was Heteru, she's Aphrodite, and the others. Thoth, spelled 2 different ways, but basically pronounced Tehetu in Egyptian, is Hermes in the Greek mythology. So names don't always mean a lot, but we'll talk about a few of these goddesses. And I want to start with Newt. Newt was the goddess of the sky. And she's the representation in the East with illumination and this reciprocal relationship with the lands and the people and the beings and hope and new beginnings. So the story of Newt is that at sunset, Newt is in the west receiving the sun as it sets, and she takes it into her body, and into her body in gestation. She leans across the earth and she becomes the Milky Way and holds in her body the sun throughout the night. And in the morning, she gives birth to the sun. Every day, every day. She receives it at the evening. She holds it in gestation and gives birth. So she's the representation of birth, of death, and of rebirth, over and over and over. And her mother, Tefnut, we also see in the East with illumination and that reciprocal relationship. She is actually a goddess of moisture, though we put her in the East with the air as the element in the East. She's a goddess of the underworld who gives water to those on their way to the underworld as they journey. But she's the goddess who sits at the mountain, in the air on the mountain, waiting for the sunrise. She's there watching her daughter Newt give birth every day as the sun rises in the sky. She gave birth to Geb, who is the god of the earth, and to Newt, the goddess of the sky. And then there's Bast, or sometimes pronounced Basset. She was the ancient goddess of protection and sensual pleasure. She was a warrior daughter of Ra. She was a protector, and she was sent to defend the pharaoh. So she was in the beginning a lion goddess, and over time manifested as a gentle aspect of the cat, because she's also the goddess of sensual pleasure. And the cat, much more sensual than the lion. So she represents that total harmony within, that recognition within ourselves that we are sensual beings, and that sensual pleasure is the happiness, the contentment, the peace. So she represents creativity and vitality, harmony, joy, laughter, a place for healing and growing. And then there's Hathor, or Heteru. She's known as the cow goddess, the bringer of nourishment. And I'll show you a couple more pictures, but as you can see, her face is a little distorted because she has cow ears. That's the representation of the cow goddess in there. She is a goddess of love and of joy and music and dance and fertility, lovemaking, spiritual nourishment. And she's a goddess of the South, representing all those aspects. The South is that place where we have the opportunity to fall in love with the rhythm of life. And we move to the West with Sekhmet. Sekhmet, there are so many stories about Sekhmet. Oh, the fierce, passionate warrior, but the tender, passionate, loving protector as well. She's represented in many forms, but the consistent form is the lion head, and usually a solar disc, because she was also known as a solar goddess. So that's the disc that you see above her head. That's the Uraeus, the cobra, the snake on her head, which is a representation of the third eye as well. She's almost always seen with her breasts exposed, and sometimes there's only one breast. You'll see this again in another goddess. She's very tender and loving to those she's protecting, and she's very fierce with her protection. And so she represents intuition and compassion and introspection. She's the one who helps us remember our story, remember who we are. And along with her in the West is Hapi, who is the guardian of the waters of life. Now, many anthropologists or Egyptologists have identified Hapi as the god of the Nile, which is not true at all if you look at the writings. She is a goddess of the inundation of the Nile, the waters that rose during the seasons with the Nile. Now, I say goddess because Happy looks like a man in most pictures, and sometimes with a big belly, but always with a female breast, usually only one, but sometimes two breasts. So, and there's usually flowers on the head. But the name Happy translates to water or river. And she's actually the goddess of the waters of the Nun, the goddess of all gods. Represents plentifulness and fertility. So she's our bridge to the inner and the outer worlds, our guide for life, our guide taking us through the waters. The water is ever changing. The water flows, just as you can see in this picture, the ripples on the water, the ripples going out and coming in. The water of a variety of forms, because water can be rain, it can be tears. It can change into ice and liquid and gas. So it's flowing, or it can be stagnant, but it quivers over the depth. So the water is there for us as a reminder with Happy and Sekhmet. And then in the north, there is Moot, the goddess of truth and universal order. Her role is to teach us, to encourage us, to pay attention to our every thought, our words, of course, and the things that we do, our deeds, but even our very thoughts, teaching us to live in accordance with spiritual law. Her symbol is the ostrich feather, and it is both black and white. The ostrich feather has both, because it's a symbol of duality. The symbol typically in the temples that her feather is white, symbolizing that triumph of light over darkness. But the actual ostrich feather has both black and white. So in the north, she represents shedding our fear, facing the shadows, standing up as the warrior of the heart, standing up with strength, standing ready for transformation. And of course, the earth is in the north. And the earth is that solid yet malleable source for us, the roots of things, and the memory of the celestial bodies. So there she is in the north. And then there's Isis, Aset. She is the manifestation of divine love, and she stands in the center of the spirit wheel, the center of sovereignty. She is the goddess of creation, the goddess of the sky, the earth, the moon. Regardless of the transitions and the stories over time, she embodies the alchemical transformation in her manifestation of divine love. As that goddess of magic, she teaches us to use our gifts to create the life, not just that we desire, but the life of our heart's desire. And teaches us to be an agent of change, to be influential, to give life to what is dead and forgotten, as the story in Isis and Osiris. So knowing the universal laws of nature, and using some magic, prayer, meditation, intention, we can transform our dreams into reality. And we can use the energy and the information from the goddesses to help us see where we need to go and how we need to, paths we need to follow, and how those paths can help us as we move forward. So you're always creating intention. And those desires manifest, whether you are thinking that that is an intention. Your desires, positive and negative, are manifesting because you bring them forth as desires. So Moot would tell us to keep focused on your goals and your desires and release them into the wisdom of your soul. So focus your intention, tie it to your heart's energy, and create your life experience. And if you would like to continue this experience, then I invite you to join me in the course September 2nd. I will send out an email with this information, and I'll post it again in the chat here in just a minute. But let me come out of sharing and go back to the screen here. So I'm seeing in the chat, Anya says, I have to go be a kitchen goddess and make dinner. I love that. But I just, I want to thank you for being here today. And let me see if I can post the registration. This is the link to register for the course where you can find out more information about it. And you can go to the Mother Earth site, either of my websites there at the bottom of the emails. And I will, you know, I'll post the recording and send you an email with the link to the recording and more information about the course if you're interested in joining the course. So it's yes, I see a question here, Ayana and the Egyptian goddesses. Yes, there's link across the goddesses, across time. Isis and Hathor are very similar, but Hathor and Isis are very similar. In fact, over time, many of the attributes of Isis are known with Hathor, and the reverse, Hathor attributes are known with Isis. So part of that is the transition, because remember, we're talking thousands of years, thousands of years. And so the stories change over time and different names get slipped into places. The stories are similar, but sometimes they're attributed to different goddesses because, you know, at one point in time, the cult following of Hathor was larger than the cult following of Newt or of Isis. And then later, Isis following was much larger than Hathor's. Now, there were temples and there were cults of multiple goddesses throughout time. But the stories did change back and forth with depending on who the pharaohs were, who the pharaohs' primary guides were as they went through time, and things like that. So I do hope you'll join me in the course, because there's so much more to tell. There's far more than I could even begin to tell in the course, let alone in this, you know, hour and a half webinar. The information is just massive, and I won't even begin to attempt to cover everything. Not that I have a clue about so much of it. Is just, but I will talk in depth about the goddesses that I've presented today, and I'll link those to the elements and the directions and and the archetypes, so that we can look at how we can bring those into our lives and how those can influence the way that we look at things and the way that we respond and the way that we go about living of our life. So yeah, there. Carol says, I understand Ayana was worshipped long before Isis. It depends on the timeline as to who was worshipped when, because you know, an example of that is that in India, they will tell you that they were the beginning of the tones of yoga, of Om. But the ancient Egyptian history will tell you the same thing, that, and there is a yoga, it's called a different name, but it's the yoga of Egyptian, of the ancient Egyptians as well. So I think, you know, there are pyramids all over the world. I mean, the ones in Egypt are the most famous, and their design perhaps is the most amazing design. But during that time period, and even later than the Egyptian pyramids, if they were actually built 5,000 years ago, because many say they were built long before that. But if they're 5,000 years old, there are many other pyramids built during that time period and later. So it's the energy, the energy that we're talking about is the information goes out into the world. And it's a concept that we have a hard time with. But think about this. Are you breathing right now? Are you breathing air? Do you think about that? Probably not. I don't think about it. And, you know, so reach out to the air and touch it. Can you do that? No, we can't touch air, but we believe that it's there. And even more simplistic is the sun. You know, we know, or we believe, that the sun is always shining, even though the earth turns and we can't always see the sun. So this information that goes out, and this is where we're really getting into quantum physics, the information goes out in a vibration, and it doesn't go to just one person. It goes out into the collective, and those who are able to receive it get that information, and it's put into words and into language of the culture where that comes about. So the variety of gods and goddesses that are known from one culture to another came about from the same source. And so, yes, many of them have identical attributes across. And if you pick any indigenous people on the planet of the earth, there will be similarities across some of their deities from one group to another to another. There will be similarities in their ceremonies. There will be similarities in their belief systems. So very, very much. How did that happen? Well, you know, people talk about the migration from that life started in Africa and migrated into all these directions. And I'm not validating or unvalidating that. It's just that the information came to all of the people wherever they were. And that energy flows, that information flows. We're not all open and willing to receive it, but the energy and the information is there. So the gods and the goddesses are very similar across multiple cultures. And who came first is the myth of the chicken or the egg. It doesn't matter who came first, but that they're there, and they're so very valuable for us to learn from and for us to study and know and do. So I see there's a note in the chat about Dr. Sue Morter and her energy codes, yes. Awaken Yoga, yes. And many other sources as well. There are many, many more, lots and lots of sources. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm so appreciative, so very grateful for all of you who've come, and I hope that you have enjoyed this. I hope that you find some aspects that you can take with you along the journey. And if you want to move forward in this, do join me for the course, and I will send out probably tomorrow morning. I'll send out a link with the recording, because I know some people left early and other people registered and could not attend, because I had almost I had a little more than 250 people registering for it. So I'll send that link out, and with that, I'll send information that you can read about the upcoming course and the registration for the course if you choose to do that. And send me an email if you have any questions. Peggy, let me type that in, Peggy at Mother Earth Sacred Tours.net is my email address. So, and I have two websites: the Mother Earth Sacred Tours.net, Mother Earth's with an S, Sacred Sites.com was created for the summit, but I use both of those websites and post most of the information goes to both websites. So thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you coming, and I'm so happy to share this with you. This is just, it's my heart's desire to share this with people. Thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.